Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast's returning interview with none other than Will Scouch of Scouching. Will, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be back. It's great to see you again.
For those of you who didn't listen to our first interview, which we highly recommend, it was a great time. Will is the founder of Scouching. You can find him at Scouching. That's couching with an S at the beginning on Twitter, youtube.com/Scouching. He does a lot of great work there, has a Patreon as well, and then is also a contributor for McKeen's Hockey. So, Will, we were just talking before I hit record here, but we're experiencing some like post-draft fatigue. Like we're finally resting our eyes a little bit, and you seem to be, you're still trucking along.
In a sense, yeah. I mean, the last thing for the 2020 draft is just the video recaps I do. So I did it last year. So every team gets one. Luckily, they're pretty quick to put together because like 99% of the work is already done. Just had to circle back on the lesser known names that went off the board this year, but that usually doesn't take too long. And it's not so bad. I think the week leading up to the draft was a lot more fatiguing than the week since, for sure.
All right, so I won't make it too hard on you. I'll start with this softball. So one of the few predictable things of the draft happened. Lafreniere, Byfield, Stützle in the top three. A lot of people said the draft starts at 4, which for us was very relevant because that was the Detroit Red Wings. Tell us who you thought the Wings should have picked, given how it fell, and then obviously knowing it's Lucas Raymond, your overall thoughts on the player and the pick.
Yeah, so at the time, honestly, like what I usually think about is if I were sitting at the draft table, what are the names I would push for? You know, who in this range am I happy with? And to me, that name was one of Marco Rossi or Lucas Raymond. And honestly, the more I watch of both of them, the less and less I really care about which one you prefer. I think that Lucas Raymond has the potential to be, I would think, a more impactful overall player in terms of driving play, but Marco Rossi has a tremendous skill set and tremendous set of talents that drive offense really, really well. He's a competent defender, but his offensive talent is off the charts. Whereas with Lucas Raymond, there's a lot of potential for good offense down the road. But what I love about him is just how smart he is. He's just such a rock solid hockey player. Like you never really have to worry about him when he's on the ice. He works hard. He's an incredibly explosive skater. First couple of steps are quick, which is sometimes all you need to win a race to an open puck or get into a puck battle. He drove unreal results at the SHL level last year. Like he was one of the better defense first wingers that I tracked all year, which for a guy who has the reputation of being more offensive kind of leads me to believe that, you know, when he's playing as a rookie in Sweden in the pro league, they probably were telling him like, here's all the things you need to be sure you're doing on a day-to-day basis before you can be the guy filling the net with pucks. I mean, I think he also is working on the strength and the offensive ability to unlock what he can do, but I thought that at 4, one of those two guys, I wouldn't have been upset. I mean, if Cole Perfetti, who was rumored to be the guy, was the guy, I would trust what Steve Yzerman can do to develop, I guess his development staff, I should say, to develop the issues that he had with his skating, which is really the primary cause for concern, I would say. But Lucas Raymond is a great pick. I think it's the easiest pick to make it for. It was the biggest no-brainer pick. And clearly, coming out of the draft, they really, really like the guys that came out of Sweden this year for them.
I mean, it's not like Håkan Andersson hasn't done anything for that organization before. No. So I'll transition to another Lucas Raymond question here because he has such a high amount of skill, but he is still pretty raw in a few aspects. And given that he is slightly undersized, what do you think is a reasonable timeline for Lucas Raymond to get to the NHL?
Well, I mean, I think he's played 6 games this year, and he's already, I think, 40% of the way to matching his production from last year. Like, he's taken a step. He's playing more on the power play this year. He wasn't last year. You know, he is being relied upon a lot more on his team in situations where he's going to be able to use his offense. I think that the only real thing that is a factor for him is time. I really think that, if you want a specific time frame, I wouldn't be surprised to see him come over and play maybe even as an AHLer next year. I think if he if he further develops his game over the course of this season and continues to improve over the course of the year, has a great World Junior, all those fun things, if that happens, I think might be able to push for a job next year. I think he thinks the game at a really, really high level. He puts in the work that you need. He's a really, really respectable player when you watch him play. And the only thing I think with him is he needs to fill out his frame a bit to get a bit stronger, especially when he has the puck on his own stick. But away from the puck, when he finds open space and he can get that shot off, he's unbelievable. He's got a great shot, really, really good ability off the puck. It's just a matter of strength with the puck on his stick. I think he can learn that over the course of this year. He's getting put in a lot more situations where he can play with the puck, which wasn't really the case last year. I really like where he's going so far with his game. So I would say maybe next season, but being conservative, which is usually my tendency, maybe 2 seasons. But I honestly think the time frame is relatively quick, just mostly surrounding how he perceives the game as it goes on.
So then, that all being said, when he does break through in Detroit, what do you think Lucas Raymond's ultimate ceiling could or should be? Like, is he an 80-point player? Is he a 60-point player? First power play? Is he top line? Again, it's line driving wingers are rare in the NHL, but I've seen some people say that Raymond is the type of guy who can carry a line from the wing. Where do you see him ultimately topping out if things go reasonably well in his development?
Well, I think Lucas Raymond is going to play a really interesting role for an NHL team. And I think he's going to be playing a role that a lot of people overlook. Like you kind of alluded to it. He really strikes me as a player that just makes life way easier for his line mates in multiple ways. So he helps out his defense really well and suppressed danger against in the defensive zone really well in the SHL last year. He's a hard worker. He's a physical player. He applies pressure relentlessly when he doesn't have the puck. I don't really see a situation where he's anything less than a top 6 winger. I think there's potential down the road. He has the mobility in the brain to potentially play center. I think it's a possibility. But I think more reasonably, like a first-line center, pairing him with a speedster like Dylan Larkin or a finisher like Anthony Mantha, if those two guys are there for the long run. I mean, Lucas Raymond, I don't think is a guy that you park in the offensive zone just teeing up shots all night. I think he's much better served as a 200-foot guy with a great impact on the game overall, with some really, really dangerous shooting instincts and some decent creativity in front of the net. So I think he's kind of a really high-level Swiss Army knife. He's going to be a really reliable player away from the puck. I really get the feeling that he's going to chip in offensively. I don't know about a point-per-game player, but he certainly will be a player who will make life a lot easier for his line mates. And if he's playing on your first line with skilled players or designated goal scorers who can really shoot the puck, I think he's going to make a great fit regardless of who he's playing with. Just a rock-solid hockey player, I think.
All right, so you heard it from Will Scouch first. We just drafted Mark Stone. I'm just kidding. So
That's speaking to my fancies, and you know it, Brad.
There is a very specific reason I said Mark Stone and not anybody else. So now that we've got Red Wings fans good and excited, let's talk about their second round, because obviously where they're at in their rebuild, they are just stockpiling infinity darts to throw at the board. They had 3 second rounders last year, 3 this past draft, and they've already got 3 for this upcoming season. So they took William Wallander, Theodor Niederbach, and Cross Hannes. What did you make of that round for the Red Wings?
Yeah, I think with the Red Wings, I trust what they're doing in terms of who they're looking at and what exactly it is that they're looking for in players. I thought William Wallander at 32 was a great pick. I know there are people out there who are much lower on him than I am. I had him ranked in my top 20. I think that you bet on his mobility and you bet on his creativity with the puck. I think he's probably one of the rawest players in the draft, but to me, I'm not really scared of players that are quote unquote raw. Like, he's huge, he's really young, but he skates like he's 5'10". He's got really good skill for a big guy, and if you can refine that even more, I think you've got yourself a great defenseman there. I think he's got some issues with his positioning in the defensive zone, which can burn him sometimes, but whenever I've seen him put in a situation that isn't at the junior level, that seems to go away a little bit, and he seems to be a bit more careful with his game, especially breaking pucks out up the ice. In junior, he will go end to end effortlessly a lot of the time, and some of the time you go, what are you thinking? You're nuts if you're going to be doing that at the next level. And at the next level in the Allsvenskan so far, I've seen him, being more patient, using his mobility and his skill to open up the ice a little bit more to look for passing options. But if he sees a seam to rush, he'll probably take that chance. I think he's a great bet in terms of maybe not an NHL player for the next 2 seasons, but just as a really rock solid two-way impact guy with some really interesting offensive talent. Like, there were players on my tracking list this year who, across a 7-game sample, got fewer shot attempts from high and medium danger areas than Wallander did, and they were forwards. So, he's a guy who jumps into the offensive zone a lot to generate offense, which I'm not afraid of. I know some people are in terms of looking at defensemen, but I think in the modern world of hockey, you have to look for defensemen that can engage offensively, and Wallander is no different. Niederbach and Hannes, I thought Niederbach was a perfectly reasonable pick at 51. I know people are huge fans of him. I'm not necessarily on that same board, but I think what's very interesting about him is that he missed an entire season and came back and still performed very, very well overall. Really good power play puck distributor. I think that's his best attribute, is his puck distribution. He's more of a low pace, kind of middle of the ice puck management player where he can find his line mates, move pucks up the ice with control, and just make plays. I question how much his game translates once he goes to higher levels, but perfectly reasonable swing to take, especially if he's your third guy off the board. Cross Hannes, I like his skill, really offensively skilled player, good metrics in terms of getting points on goals when they're scored on the ice, good finisher. He scored a lacrosse goal this year, which was fun when that was a thing that everyone would seem to be wanting to do. I think his defensive game on paper and from what I've seen is where he needs some work, but he might be one of these players that for now has some defensive issues with the work rate and everything, and instead focuses more on offense and attacking and trying to get to the net with that skill. I think he's an interesting project to work on. Again, if he was the maybe second or third guy I drafted this year, I'd be a little bit more hesitant. I didn't have him ranked because I question how projectable his game is, but he is very skilled and a lot of fun to watch. So we'll see what happens. So I think overall, they might not have picked everyone who I would have pushed for at every single slot in the second round there, but I see the reasoning behind all of these picks. Niederbach, I think, could be a really good puck distribution center with maybe some power play potential. Cross Hannes, tons of skill, and it's never a bad thing to bet on that. And Wallinder, I think, there's a chance Wallinder never plays in the NHL, but I'm not of the belief that it's worth passing on him just because you're, concerned about that possibility because of, the talent that he shows on the ice and the raw potential. I think there's tons and tons of potential for him to be a really exciting offensive defenseman in the NHL one day.
So you've kind of alluded to this, and this is something that I've personally put forward to the listeners, which is that, the picks didn't go how we would have necessarily picked them. Like, I personally didn't predict those 3 guys being who Detroit would pick based on who was on the board. I'm a fan of Wallander. I'm a fan of Niederbach, but even admittedly, that's not who I was shooting for at that time. But what I do think is happening here is that the Red Wings are taking their abundance of dart throws, as Brad called them before, and just going for high upside swings. Like, they could swing and strike out and fall on their ass and embarrass themselves, or they can knock one out of the park, which is kind of what they would want to do because they don't have that Alexis Lafreniere lottery luck, and they don't have the Braden Point that Yzerman had in Tampa Bay on this team yet. So they're trying to generate one of those, and they can't control the lottery. So what they can do is try to get an extremely high value pick in the second round. Basically, I just gave you my statement in the form of a question, but is that your read on this as well?
I can see that. I think you look at some of the guys that went off the board in the 50 to 70 range. And I'm just looking at the draft list here. I mean, I'd be curious why Detroit didn't go for a name like Kasper Simon-Tyval if they were drafting guys like Cross Hannes. I think Simon-Tyval brings more pace to the game right now. I mean, maybe Hannes has, I think Hannes has really good skill and offensive potential. But, you look at other names that were going off the board there. I mean, Jean-Luc Foudy, I thought, was a guy that the Detroit Red Wings might be able to work with and develop into, especially with someone like Dylan Larkin on the team already. Danny Gushchin went 76th. I mean, that's a guy who went way too late to me, and I thought that really sort of screamed sort of big swing for the fences. But I guess these are swings that are a bit different. You know, Teddy Niederbach, really smart player. I really like how he distributes the puck. Once in a while, I saw him do some really impressive rushes up the ice on his own stick. So, you know, people who might think they might have hit for a double instead of tried to crack a home run, you know, I think they're going to end up with at least some serviceable NHL players out of this. And if you get those in the late second round, you know, if let's say all 4 of these first 4 picks off the board become serviceable, not bad NHL players, then that is a good pickup. And if you have your top line winger in Lucas Raymond, that's a great first 4 picks off the draft. You know, it makes your life way easier when it comes to filling out your roster. So I think it's entirely possible with these players. Just, you know, they're swings, but maybe not the hardest swing for the fences they could have taken. But I don't see any real issue with that overall.
So I just want to circle back to one thing about Niederbach before we move on, because you alluded to it earlier that he missed an entire year due to a knee injury. So one of the theories that I've seen floating around, and I don't know how much I buy into it personally, but I think it's worth noting, is that because he missed a full year of development, you almost look at him as an underager for this draft because his development is a year behind everybody else. So he missed the year, came back for his D-1 year, and lit up the Swedish Junior League. And now he's back in the Swedish Junior League this year, and he's off to a blazing hot start. So do you think the Red Wings might have factored that into it? Just that, yeah, he maybe not be the best player on our board right now, but given his lack of development versus everybody else, we think that ceiling might be even higher once he, quote unquote, catches up?
100%. I think that absolutely was a factor. I watched a lot of him last year to really try to get what he was all about. And I mean, I had him ranked at 66th, which is exactly where I'm just looking now, like Bob McKenzie had him slotted in there. Craig Button had him slotted in there. A few different outlets had him slotted in there. A few had him a lot higher though. And when I asked around about it and brought up what issues he might show in terms of producing at 5-on-5 and, you know, what I had seen of him or at least with my eyes, didn't really give me a tremendous amount of confidence in terms of projecting his game. But I mean, it was your third guy off the board, and there is certainly that factor to it where you have a guy who missed a whole year and still was over a point per game against under 20 competition, and I believe he had never played against that level before. So I think that's on its own pretty remarkable. I know for a fact that not every single player in the NHL is an extremely high-paced player, so it's not like there's a guy like Niederbach. It's not like guys like Niederbach don't exist in the NHL. So I think it's a perfectly reasonable swing to take, and the fact that he's gotten off to such an enormously massive start is promising to say the least. So I'll be very curious to see how his career goes because, you know, I know that it's hard to evaluate when you have a player who's missed an entire season. I had a player like Anton Johannesson also ranked quite high, but he was also a player who's missed a lot of time due to injury. So, you know, there were things that concerned me with Niederbach, but again, like this is why I rank guys in tiers, because you can make a case for Niederbach much higher than I had him ranked. It's just, for me, the pace of the game is kind of where my questions start, but that's something that hopefully you can work with because his brain is at such a high level when he's playing on the ice.
So then as the Red Wings got into the third round, they had 2 more picks. They traded back with one of them, but not overly far. I found it interesting that they took Wallander, a left-handed shot D, at 32, and then in the third round they went back-to-back left-handed D, and all 3 of these guys I find to be very different players. Obviously, Donovan Sabrango playing in Kitchener here, I'm a big fan of his, completely biased just because I've got to watch him play 120-something times, basically. Yep. And he's your kind of two-way, high IQ with a bit of a physical edge defenseman, and then they got the Emil Viro, the perennial overachiever, or always playing above his age group, playing in Liga last year, although being your quiet, unspectacular defenseman. What did you make of those picks coupled with the Wallander pick?
I don't mind. The more I watched of Emil Viro, the less and less I minded him. I know that there was some data out there that from people that I trust that indicate that his game might not project super well, especially when you're on smaller ice in North America. A lot of dumping out of his own zone, a lot of dumping into the offensive zone. But the good thing about Vero is that I think he has a lot of really solid mobility to fix that mentality problem where, you can just tell him, like, you're more than capable of skating with the puck and finding line mates and all these things. But I think that there were issues that I think make him a bit more of a long-term project, but an interesting one to take at 70. I mean, I had him ranked 76. And you're betting on sort of his mobility, and his defensive ability, I would say, is fine. But I don't think that's a bad bet to make at 70. Sebrango, I didn't track any data of Sebrango. I only saw him play a little bit. I never saw anything that I found that blew me away for a potential NHL pick, but he had some good offensive metrics. The defensive side of the puck, at least relative to the team when he wasn't on the ice, was not as remarkable, we'll call it, as more of the offensive side of the game. He was a net negative goal impact player for Kitchener overall, but I do see everything that you just mentioned about his game. The defensive side of the game with that sort of edge is there. So it's just going to be a matter of improving the actual results, because overall, I didn't see enough out of him to really, I didn't have him ranked, but I know that people were fans of him. So again, if I was in that room, probably not the guy I would have gone for at 63, especially there. But if there was a lot of people pounding the table and screaming about him, he's not a nobody. And I think that there is some data that paints him much more favorably. Vero, I think, is an interesting one. They took some nice bets to hedge, though, I think, against a player like Niederbach. I think someone like Vero has a more reliable sort of method to playing the game. And I think Wallander can sort of burn himself a lot, and Vero is playing at a higher level in the Liga. And Sebrango, I mean, who knows? We'll see. I mean, defensemen can take a while to figure it out, especially if they're that physical side player. It's just going to be a question of turning around those actual results, because that's kind of what pushed me a little bit away from Sebrango.
All right, and then I won't make you dive into each of the Red Wings picks rounds 4 through 7, because those are all long shots to begin with. But were there any of their remaining picks that you really loved, that stood out to you, or any picks that made you just say, what in the ever-living hell are you doing?
Yeah, so I can't really say much about Sam Stange and Keenan Draper. I didn't see a ton out of either. I didn't see anything of Keenan Draper. I think I saw one St. Andrews game all year, and Canadian high school, I don't know. Sam Stange, he's fine, I suppose. I didn't see a tremendous amount out of him that screamed, this guy should have been picked a year ago. Alex Cotton, I think, is very... The Twitter sphere latched onto his production. I don't think it's projectable at all. I was surprised to see him get picked, and I was also surprised to see Detroit be the one that takes the pick on him. He's a very heavily sheltered offensive-focused player, which I don't think projects well for a defenseman. He's not the best skater. He kind of lumbers his way around the ice. I just didn't really see, especially for someone who was undrafted last year, I didn't really see a guy who really needed to be part of an NHL team right now. Maybe another year where he can work on some other areas of the game, we could get there. But the other guys I actually really am interested in. I think Kyle Aucoin was a guy who, whenever I saw guys like Colby Ambrosio or Mitchell Miller play, he would do things once in a while where I go, who's that guy? And usually when I do that and it's the same guy a couple of times in a row, that's usually a good sign. And Kyle Aucoin, I think, especially for where he went, drafting guys who have that capability where once in a while you see some skill out of your defenseman, some aggressiveness out of your defenseman. There's good defensive results for Aucoin overall, good two-way results for him overall with Tri-City. I was curious about that pick, and I'm curious to see where he goes. And then the really interesting one to me is Chase Bradley at 203. No one really was talking about this guy at all year. Someone in my Discord server asked for a bit of data on him, and so I went and tracked him. He barely plays with his team in Omaha. He's a fourth-line guy, I think, and you don't really see a ton of USHL fourth-liners, but what I've seen out of him is really impressive, I think. I think that he's a real no-nonsense guy who can just generate offense. I know he didn't score a ton of points, but a lot of that is because he wasn't playing very much. He drove possession really well in the games that I tracked. Definitely needs some work and refinements in terms of some fundamentals like completing passes, being aware of line mates, but he puts in the work. He generated really good offensive results. I would be really curious to see what happens with him. He might not be a guy who, is a freshman, one and done college guy, but if you give him 2 or 3 years to develop and just sort of raise his floor, I think there could be an interesting player there because the result he put up in limited playing time was impressive. So him and a coin are the late round guys for the Red Wings that I'm really interested in. I'd be surprised if Alex Cotton as a defenseman became much of anything, and Stange and Draper, we'll see, I guess. I don't know, especially Keenan Draper. I know they say that they drafted him because he was the best player on the board, but I don't know how that, especially when you look at who went undrafted. But we'll move on from that, and I would definitely focus on a coin and Bradley for sure.
Well, I'm glad you got to that because O'Coin and Bradley were probably two of the guys that befuddled us the most. In our time since our review episode, I've probably put in the most work trying to dig up footage on them. So I appreciate you doing our work for us. I'm going to pivot us away from the Red Wings specifically. Let's talk about the first round because it was a little bit of an interesting one, especially near the top. So I guess I won't ask you a pointed question, but just ask for your general thoughts on how that shook out and maybe what was the most surprising or who got the most value there.
Sure. So it was weird. I mean, I think the first 20 picks went about how the conventional wisdom was expecting it to go. I mean, I guess for pleasant surprises in the top 20, I was really pleasantly surprised to see Lukas Reichel go 17th. I tracked 96 players all year this year, at least to some decent sample size, and Lukas Reichel was one of the first ones that I tracked, and at the end of the year, he was still one of the best players in terms of generating high danger chances from in front of the net. So he's a guy who just goes out and executes. He's working on his transition game, but he is a guy who is, I think, got the potential to be a great complementary scorer in the NHL. If he's not the primary focus point for a line and driving that play up the ice, he can be a guy who finds open ice in the offensive zone really, really well, distributes pucks really, really well, but his best thing is off-puck offense, getting that open ice and just getting shots off. I think if he gets stronger on his feet, he has a lot of potential as a transition player. He was willing to go into the corners and dig for pucks and battle and do all those things coaches are looking for, but you could tell that he was small and in a men's league for the first time and getting, removed from play a little bit too easily. But he's taken steps, I think, over the summer based on what I've seen from him, however limited in scope those games might have been. But that was the guy where when I heard his name called at 17, I had him ranked at 19th. I was really pleasantly surprised that Chicago took a risk on him. I mean, maybe there might have been some better players on the board overall, but that is a perfectly reasonable pick, I think, based on the data that I tracked. The 20 to 31, I would say, range at the end of the first round was a complete gong show. I was really kind of trying to find the words at times about what was going down. I mean, would Shakir Mukhamadullin have been my guy at 20? No. Would Yegor Chinnikov been my guy at 21? No. But Hendrix Lapierre to Washington is hilarious, especially considering they landed Connor McMichael last year. Washington, I think, is, even though they're, a playoff team that goes deep, they're doing pretty well to replenish their cupboard. I really liked, though, the group of guys that went 29 through 31. Brendan Brisson, Maverick Bourque, and Ozzy Wiesblatt. I think those guys went way too late. I mean, I had Brendan Brisson ranked 31st, but you could easily make the case for that guy to go 10 picks higher. Braden Schneider went 19th. I would much rather have Brendan Brisson than Braden Schneider. He's one of these guys, I think it was JD Burke who mentioned what Brendan Brisson, if all else fails, Brendan Brisson will still have an NHL job just because of his one-timer on the power play. Even if he's a third-line complementary scoring winger, you could put him on your second unit power play and he'll just crank one-timers all day and probably score a few goals. So I think 10 picks ahead of that, I would have started thinking about Brisson, even if I didn't have him ranked that high. Maverick Bourque should have been gone 10 picks higher at least. I couldn't believe that the Dallas Stars, who just went to the Stanley Cup final, got, to me, one of the smartest and most clever puck distributors in the draft. I think he is adaptable offensively. As an offensive center, there's tons and tons of potential there. And then Ozzy Wiesblatt, I mean, I just really like the kid. Dual threat offense. Tons of potential with his skill and his speed and his aggressiveness. He's pretty slight on his feet, but I really liked him when he was playing center. He's listed as a winger, but I saw a few games where he's playing center for Prince Albert, and if he can, work on his pivots in the neutral zone to cover defensive breakouts a little bit better, and if he can sort of bring that work ethic that he has offensively to the defensive side of the game a little bit more, I think that there could be a really interesting impact player here for San Jose. I really liked San Jose's draft overall, but seeing them take Ozzy Wiesblatt at 31 really kind of put a smile on my face because I'm a big fan of him, and I was more and more a fan of him the more I saw as the year went on.
All right, so I'm sure you are seeing 2020 draft prospects in your sleep at this point.
Yes.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit and kind of ask you almost a philosophical question about the 2021 draft, given what the Red Wings have done. So by and large, people are very, very happy with what the Red Wings did in free agency. They didn't take any huge swings, but they dramatically improved their team upon last year, which still could mean they finished 31st, but let's assume they jump up a couple spots. The 2021 draft is shaping up to be the no clear-cut number one, but a really strong top 10 to 12, depending who you talk to. Do you think that's a reasonable statement so that the Red Wings fans don't need to be super concerned if they end up picking, let's say, 7th next year instead of 4th again? What's your initial impression of the upcoming draft?
I can't remember the last time a draft was like this, honestly. I mean, I don't see a clear-cut number one at all. I don't. I think I have Aatu Ratu right there now, but that's not. I don't think that's at all set in stone. I mean, there's a lot of guys who haven't played yet that are very, very talented. I don't have them ranked, obviously, right now because I haven't seen them play. But I could easily see a situation where a number of guys off the NTDP team go first overall. I could see Owen Power being a guy who works his way into first overall contention. I can see a lot of different scenarios playing themselves out. I'm already getting impatient to start seeing what other people are sort of thinking about for top-end players in this draft, especially based on the guys that have already been playing. I mean, even a guy like Nikita Chibrikov in Russia has been looking awesome for the St. Petersburg junior team, and he's been playing in the KHL a little bit. Obviously, that's coronavirus related, but he's still playing in the KHL, and his team is not completely under the water when he's playing with a bunch of kids who are playing in the KHL for the first time. Zach LaRue in Halifax has looked awesome in the games that they've played this year, and I really, really like him. Samuel Salminen in Finland. I mean, Samuel Helenius is a huge guy already playing in the Liga who I've liked a lot more than I think most people. And, that goes out to the people who think I don't like big players. I mean, Samuel Helenius is a 6'6" center, but he skates like he's 6 feet tall, and it's really awesome to watch. I think there's a lot of talent in this upcoming draft. Maybe to me, it's as if the draft crop for next year is like this year, but from, I'd say, guys that went in that 5 to 10 range, but there's about 15 of them. So you're going to end up with, I think, very different looking lists across the board. I think it's still very early and a lot of players still haven't played. But I wouldn't be surprised to see some very interesting looks at who goes first overall. I can't remember the last time it was this questionable. The last time I remember this anything close was probably 2017, but that was more like, there's Nico Hischier, sort of this 5th, 6th ranked guy coming over to North America for the first time, and everyone was sort of focused on Nolan Patrick. And in retrospect, it looks like 2017 was a pretty even year, but this is like right from the get-go. I don't really see a ton that denotes this guy is the best player available. I mean, Aatu Ratu, I think, has the potential to be that. I think his offensive game has stagnated a little bit in the last couple of seasons. Like last year, he only scored 2 goals at the junior level, but that doesn't mean he wasn't getting his chances. I just think the finishing talent is a bit lacking there. He's a great two-way player. He reminds me of like an Anton Lundell, but ratcheted up a little bit. So maybe not an elite level high-end center, but I think he could get there if his season progresses and he develops a little more. I mean, the defense group this year is also looking great. You got Simon Edvinsson and Hugo Gabrielson for Frölunda both playing together. They both look awesome so far. So I think there's a lot of really interesting looks for guys, and they're coming from all over the place. There's defensemen in Russia, which to a lot of people were a unicorn. Now there's multiple defensemen in Russia that I would look at in the first round. Daniil Chayka, Kirill Kirsanov, Vladislav Lukashevich. There's a bunch of them. Dmitry Kostenko is another one. I think it's a very, very interesting first round for next year that's coming up. I've been digging through 2021 guys for about a week now, and I mean, I have a rough order of about 2 rounds worth of guys that I've liked to varying degrees, but I have no idea what's going to happen in June for sure, assuming that's when the draft happens.
All right, and on that note, one final question for me, and it's going to involve 2021. So the Rona has ruined the world, and it has probably ruined scouting for this year. So given that we've already seen a bunch of SHL hockey, we've seen over a month of KHL hockey and MHL hockey, the QMJHL has started and has now shut down. The WHL and the OHL are not starting for a while still, so we're going to have wildly different sample sizes, which then will affect player development because you might not see a late season riser in the OHL because maybe that guy just doesn't get enough games to hit that peak. What is the mentality you, and maybe even more broadly, the scouting community should be taking going into a world where nothing is created equal?
If it's me, I think you can't stress too much. I think you have to accept that there might be a situation in this year's draft where there's a lot more question marks about almost everyone, especially North American players. You know, it doesn't seem, from what I've been able to follow in terms of the news, outside of Russia, it doesn't seem like coronavirus is causing as many issues or could pose as many issues as it has for North American junior. There are teams in Finland that have had to stop playing for a while. But outside of that, things seem to be relatively under control-ish, as much as they can be, at least relative to North America. I think looking towards 2021, there's going to be question marks, especially if things continue the way they are. You know, the CHL has hit a bit of a snag, and Canada on the whole has hit kind of a second wave here. So we'll see if that dissipates by December. I don't know. It's not up to me. It's up to society as a whole. So I think as a hockey scout, you have to accept that there's going to be limitations this year, and you're going to have to accept that there's a chance that it might just come down to rolling dice and saying, look, we like what we've seen of this guy. You know, maybe this kid from the OHL who only played 30 games might turn out to be a better player because they just missed a lot of hockey and they have this regression that's left that they still need to do. Maybe that's the way you take it and just say, well, let's just see what happens, because I think a lot of people will sort of give you a pass. That doesn't mean that you can't look at, you know, that doesn't mean you can't use data and analysis to really look at what you're getting in a player. And I think there are certainly players that are playing now that are very clearly a step ahead of some others. But I think if you think about it and try to constantly anticipate, well, you know, this guy was playing in the OHL for only 30 games, but if he had only played a 68 game sample, then he would have been better than this kid who played a full season in Sweden. That person might be right, but I feel like that's something that you can't predict with enough accuracy, that if you have, say, a top 10 or top 15 pick, that you are willing to take that risk. I think we could see some guys in North America slip in the draft that probably shouldn't slip as far as they do, but I think teams are going to look at what is right in front of them. There are guys out there that have played 14 games already, 15 games of league play. So they're going to get a bigger sample size. They're going to have more visibility. And I mean, we'll have to see what happens. I don't really know. I think trying to predict what's going to happen between now and June, I mean, think of where we were, like that was 8 months ago. So in the next 8 months, like think back to where we were 8 months ago. I have no idea where we're going to be. So all you can do is sort of sit back, look at it as it comes to you, let the kids play as long as it's safe for them to do so, and just be patient, I think, and just accept that there's uncertainty this year, because otherwise you're going to go nuts and you're probably going to overthink things. I don't know, though. It's really, really hard for sure.
Well, Will, it goes without saying that over the entire process leading up to this draft and then leading up to this draft again, you've done excellent work, and you've been a big help for hockey fans. So happy to have you back on the show. We are going to lock you into coming back on the show again, whether you like it or not. but I appreciate you coming on, and everyone check out Scouching at Scouching on Twitter, or look up Scouching on YouTube. Will does awesome work, and
thanks guys. Yep.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockey Town Evan.